A young soldier joins a corporation to see the stars, only to discover that interstellar expansion comes with a price. Fallen Dragon offers a grounded, morally complex take on corporate space colonization. Fallen Dragon is a standalone novel published in the year 2001, written by Peter F. Hamilton between his large-scale space opera projects, namely the Confederation universe, which includes the Nightstone Trilogy, and the early stages of his Commonwealth Saga. It should therefore come as no surprise that this 808-page novel shares certain thematic and structural elements with both his earlier and later works. Aspects of its world building and narrative architecture echo ideas that had already appeared in Hamilton's fiction, or would later become more fully developed trademarks of his style. Be that as it may, Fallen Dragon still feels fresh and distinctive in its own right, arguably more so than The Great North Road, or even the later Salvation sequence, which display more immediately recognizable quote-unquote Hamiltonisms, so to speak. The story begins in a distant future in which corporations have evolved into self-contained sovereign entities, complete with their own militaries. Corporate objectives have largely supplanted traditional political ideologies, and economic expansion has become the dominant organizing principle of human civilization. Motivated by youthful restlessness and a desire to escape the monotony of his homeworld, Lawrence Newton enlists in the military arm of one such corporation, hoping to see more of the universe. However, after multiple deployments to distant planets and several layovers on Earth, Lawrence grows increasingly disillusioned. He comes to recognize the exploitative and often ruthless nature of the corporate system he now serves. Yet, his circumstances offer little room for moral protest. His only viable path to freedom is financial. To accumulate enough wealth to purchase a stake in a more tolerable corporation and secure a quieter, more stable life on a distant colony world. When his platoon is dispatched to a remote colony to extract corporate profits, the mission initially appears to present a rare opportunity. Lawrence intends to exploit his secret suspicions of a hidden treasure known only to a select few, hoping that a single bold act might grant him the independence he desperately seeks. However, both the corporation's strategic objectives and Lawrence's personal ambitions are swiftly complicated by the unexpectedly determined resistance of the colonists. One word of advice: avoid reading the official synopsis on platforms such as Amazon, Goodreads, or even the summary printed on the back cover of the novel itself. It contains significant spoilers that diminish several of the book's narrative revelations. Who came up with this synopsis should reconsider their job. Now turning to the semi-objective figures of merit. Fallen Dragon occupies a comfortable middle ground between hard science fiction and science fantasy. Aside from faster-than-light travel, which in this universe is neither trivial nor ubiquitous, unlike the portal networks found in Hamilton's larger series, but instead it resembles the logistical and financial undertaking of crossing an ocean in the 19th century. The technology presented is largely plausible and represents a logical extrapolation of existing trends, if we ignore the faster-than-light travel component. This applies particularly to the biotechnological body enhancement suits used by corporate soldiers, as well as the spacecraft themselves. Again, if we momentarily set aside the faster-than-light component. In fact, one might even argue that contemporary developments in computing and artificial intelligence are not far removed from what is depicted in the novel. The technological landscape of Fallen Dragon feels restrained and grounded, which lends the setting a certain immediacy despite its interstellar scale. Regarding the scope of its narrative universe, Hamilton accomplishes a considerable amount across roughly 800 pages. The story unfolds across multiple planets, each rendered with distinct environmental and socio-economic characteristics. Although this is a standalone novel, it nonetheless conveys a sense of breadth and depth comparable to that of a series, albeit on a more contained scale. When assessing what Fallen Dragon contributes in terms of original ideas, it is important to consider its publication date of 2001. Many elements that may now appear as familiar quote-unquote Hamiltonisms were at the time either still evolving or less firmly established within his body of work. The comparatively grounded depiction of interstellar colonization, constrained by mundane yet consequential factors such as corporate return on investment and the social consequences of such economic priorities, remains particularly compelling. The novel explores how profit-driven expansion shapes not only policy but also morality and individual agency. Tonally, Fallen Dragon positions itself between the darker outlook of the Confederation universe and the comparatively optimistic trajectory of the Commonwealth Saga, at least before the major crises of those respective narratives truly unfold. Even prior to the catastrophe on Lalonde that ignites the Nightstone Trilogy, the Confederation universe setting carries a heavier undercurrent of existential dread, especially on the overpopulated Earth or the backwater colonies themselves. Conversely, the early Commonwealth setting presents a more confident and expansionist vision of humanity. Fallen Dragon navigates a middle path between these tonal extremes, both chronologically in Hamilton's bibliography and philosophically in its portrayal of humanity's future. It is also noteworthy that the novel does not center on a humanity-threatening external crisis, in contrast to the Confederation universe, the Commonwealth Saga, the Salvation sequence, or even to a lesser extent, the Great North Road. Instead, its central conflict remains socio-economic and systemic rather than cosmic in scale. This relative restraint further distinguishes it within Hamilton's oeuvre. The cast of characters is likewise more focused than in many of Hamilton's larger works. The narrative primarily follows two point-of-view characters, with a third appearing only intermittently. For an author often known for expansive ensembles and intricate narrative threads, this tighter focus is somewhat unusual and contributes to the novel's more intimate character study. In terms of critical reception, Fallen Dragon was nominated for the Arthur C. Clarke Award in the year 2002, although it did not ultimately secure a win. Popular reception, however, has been consistently strong, with an average rating of approximately 4.1 out of 5 stars across major review platforms, such as Goodreads, Library Thing, and Amazon, based on thousands of reader reviews. At this point, a clear spoiler warning is necessary. The following section will address pivotal plot developments in Fallen Dragon. If you wish to avoid significant revelations, you should skip ahead to the clearly marked non-spoiler conclusion. Fallen Dragon is also distinctive in the way its story is constructed and presented. First, its portrayal of corporate-controlled humanity feels strikingly relevant, perhaps even more so today than at the time of its publication in 2001. Yet the novel avoids descending into outright cyberpunk dystopia, entertaining though that genre may be. Instead, Hamilton presents a future shaped by corporate dominance in a manner that feels systemic and normalized, rather than theatrically oppressive. The result is a setting that appears plausible rather than exaggerated, and therefore all the more relevant. Second, because much of the narrative is told from the perspective of a corporate soldier with a functioning moral compass, alongside his squad mates and commanding officers, the corporate extraction of wealth from colonial worlds is not depicted in simplistic terms. The corporations are not presented merely as caricatured villains brutalizing innocent civilians. Quite the opposite. On one of the colony worlds, the local resistance, whose perspective is conveyed through the second primary point of view character, Denise, at times assumes the role of the apparent antagonist. The resistance employs violence, assassinations, and destabilizing tactics, while the corporate forces often appear comparatively measured and restrained in their application of force. This inversion of expectations is one of the novel's most effective narrative choices. It deliberately shifts away from the familiar trope of noble colonists resisting a cruel and inhumane occupation. Instead, the corporate soldiers are rendered, if not admirable, at least understandable and occasionally even sympathetic. While a more detached assessment makes it clear where the structural injustices lie, the reader's emotional alignment is far more complicated. The conflict resists a simple black and white moral framework. Even the long-term objectives of the corporations are not portrayed as purely malicious, although they may reasonably be described as ethically troubling or at least deeply cynical. Third, the novel is structurally disciplined. By the conclusion, Hamilton addresses all major plot threads and leaves no significant narrative strands unresolved. The resolution, particularly concerning Denise's ultimate motivation for her morally ambiguous and sometimes violent actions, offers a surprisingly grounded thematic payoff. Her lofty idealism is ultimately reframed in a way that questions whether certain grand causes are, in practice, misguided or even futile. One might compare it to a child investing immense emotional value in something that an adult would dismiss as worthless. The novel thus presents conflict and warfare without reducing its participants to moral absolutes. Another strength of Fallen Dragon lies in its sustained focus on Lawrence as the protagonist. Through his perspective, the reader witnesses the insecurities that shape his early decisions and the gradual maturation that occurs through hardship, disappointment, and self-reflection. His development unfolds across distinct phases of his life, lending the novel a subtle coming-of-age dimension within its broader military and socio-economic framework. The degree to which readers resonate with Lawrence will naturally vary, but his internal struggles provide a strong emotional anchor for the narrative, making Lawrence possibly one of Hamilton's best developed characters. An additional, more understated aspect of the world building concerns shifting social norms in the far future. In particular, the treatment of naturally grown food is portrayed as regressive or primitive, while synthetic and engineered alternatives are considered standard. It is an intriguing inversion of present-day values, which focuses on naturally grown food as being better than the alternatives, and one could imagine that within a century attitudes towards meat consumption might shift in ways not entirely dissimilar to those depicted in Fallen Dragon, while such attitudes related to fruits and vegetables are still far beyond the horizon. Such details enrich the setting without overwhelming the story. One potential point of criticism involves the depiction of romantic relationships, and particularly their physical aspects related to intimacy. While these scenes are not gratuitous in every instance, some are described with a level of explicit detail that may not appeal to all readers. To be clear, certain romantic entanglements serve clear narrative purposes. For example, the impulsive behavior of one squad member, driven largely by youthful desire and lust, becomes a catalyst for later events. Likewise, Lawrence's relationships contribute meaningfully to his character development throughout the novel, particularly during the time where he is applying for the corporate academy. However, the portrayal of Lawrence's teenage relationship with Rosalind occasionally lingers longer than necessary on their intimate moments. The emotional significance of this relationship is undeniable, yet some scenes could have achieved the same narrative effect with way greater restraint. This is of course a matter of personal preference, and other readers may view these passages differently, but I am not reading books to be aroused in such a way, and I would wager that most readers of science fiction, predominantly males, would not source their romantic, intimate inspiration in text form. Overall, Fallen Dragon distinguishes itself through a tightly resolved narrative, a compelling central character, and a thoughtful subversion of the familiar evil corporation versus virtuous colonist trope. For readers who wish to experience Peter F. Hamilton at near-space opera scale without committing to one of his multi-volume epics spanning thousands of pages, this standalone novel represents an excellent entry point into his body of work. Also, a final shout out to Ben Brooks 5831, who gave me the idea to check out Fallen Dragon. If you liked this video, you may also enjoy the other reviews and content on my channel. Feel free to leave a comment if you want to discuss the novels or if you want to suggest other books that I should review in the future. Please consider upvoting and subscribing, it is much appreciated. Thank you for watching, and until next time.